BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Martin Dowden and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you could possibly need on Tuesday the 4th of February. Our focus here is rounding up the January transfer window, which is now at an end. Well, it was a little bit of February as well, you'll notice. It's about 10 minutes past the window shutting as we record this podcast. A big few from me and I'm sure everyone else on this. I wonder how you all feel depending on how busy your club has been.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
We've got the whole window right here. I hope your thumb isn't as sore as mine. Refreshing feeds on X as 11 p.m. homed in. But let me quickly introduce our guests, our reporters, BBC's finest, Brian McLauchlin and Jane Lewis, plus Mark Atkinson, the sports editor at The Scotsman. How are you all doing?
All good. The coffee's been flowing.
Yeah. Sound a little bit tired to me. Brian, firstly, I'm going to ask you very quickly, how would you describe the window?
Not earth-shattering, I have to say. Very few big money signings. Obviously, I think the biggest deal has probably been Jota coming back to Celtic and the departure of Kyogo. I know Celtic were looking to bring in another striker as well, but they just fell short, and obviously they brought in a defender, late on in the window. But yeah, I think that's been the big signing. I think for Scottish football has certainly been the return of Jota to this game.
Jane, anything stand out for you?
I think it's been quite predictable, hasn't it, this window? I mean, I think a lot of the kind of rumoured transfers did happen. One or two of them didn't, but the few that were rumoured, I think, did take place. It kind of bubbled away throughout the day. It didn't really ever simmered away, I probably should say. It didn't really ever come to a boil, did it? It was quite slow and quite predictable, I think I would say, which is not to be a huge surprise, given that kind of winter windows are usually like this in Scotland, I would say.
I think that's a fair point, Jane, because this window, every manager you speak to, they always say it's not a great window to be doing business in, but all of them have been doing business in this window, and they all say, well, the players that they're not the players they would want, but they always sign players. So yeah, it's the time of the year when they get to shake things up a little bit, and it's the last time that most of them will get this certainly season anyway to try and aim for whatever titles or cups or relegation battles, that they'll have to go for. So, I think that the Premiership in particular this year, I think, has been very bitty. A lot of you never know what results. I mean, who could have predicted Hearts beating Dundee by 6-0 at the weekend, and who could have predicted Aberdeen going 14 games unbeaten after the start of the season they've had? So, it is interesting that all of these clubs will do a little bit of business. But it's from now until the end of May, that's what really counts.
Mark, have you been on the edge of your seat for the last 4 or 5 weeks?
Not really. It's been bland, I think. And that continues a trend of January transfer windows, especially in this country. A lot of clubs haven't got much resource to play with. Most of the budget's spent in the summer. And I think clubs are increasingly discovering that this is not the time to really scrabble around and do tangible business. There's a lot of forward planning that goes on now at clubs. So a bit underwhelmed, and I suspect some managers will be underwhelmed as well with what they've ended up with. Aberdeen, obviously, probably the big movers on deadline day, but by deadline day standards, fairly quiet.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the detail. Despite what you're saying, fairly quiet overall, but some activity around the country. I'll jump between our intrepid reporters, Jane and Brian, for some details from each club, and even talk to myself, because I've been tracking some as well over the last 24 hours. It has been a tad slow in the main, but let's start at the very top of the table. Celtic, a lot of expectation from Celtic fans about the potential of a new striker coming in. Kyogo, of course, leaving for Rennes. They did just announce, just on 11 o'clock, I think it was, the arrival of Jeffrey Schlupp from Crystal Palace. He did, of course, win the Premiership, the English Premiership with Leicester City many moons ago. Mark, are you surprised about the lack of a striker, and how do you think Celtic supporters will feel overall? Satisfied or maybe a little bit angered?
I am slightly surprised they didn't manage to get a number 9 in, although I don't think they had a great deal of options to choose from. The one that was linked the most was Matthias Kvistgaarden at Brøndby, but the asking price, which is said to be around £14 million, just too much at this stage for Celtic to pay for a guy that's not even internationalist yet. It does leave them light in terms of a natural number 9. You've only really got Adam Ida and then young Johnny Kenny as guys who are sort of regular strikers in that role. Although you could argue that Dyson Maeda, who often plays wide, can fill in there. The arrival of Jota means they can switch Maeda in there and have a really, really strong wing presence. So while Celtic fans will be disappointed, I'm sure, that they haven't got another striker to replace Kyogo Furuhashi, there are still many options in that Celtic squad. And Jeffrey Schlupp, the 32-year-old Ghanaian who's come in, he is a left-back and by trade, but he can also play in a variety of other positions. He can play in midfield, he can play as a winger, he can actually even play as a forward, although it hasn't done for some time. Left-back was actually the priority position today. Greg Taylor was the only left-back that they had to choose from in a senior capacity. Schlupp definitely adds to that after Alex Vaille's departure. I don't think Celtic come out of this window stronger than they were when they went in necessarily. Time will tell whether they can get away with just having Adam Ida as the main number 9 domestically. They probably should be fine. Celtic fans, I think, will be a tad disappointed, and I wonder what Brendan Rodgers will say tomorrow in his press conference ahead of facing Dundee, when he'll be no doubt asked about whether he's satisfied with the business that the club has done.
I think the thing on that, Martin, as well, is that Brendan Rodgers has been at pains to point out ever since it was confirmed that Kyogo was leaving that the club knew about this. The club knew, several weeks ago, if not longer, that he wanted to leave and was going to leave. So I think there'll be a massive frustration from fans, from Brendan Rodgers, that they couldn't bring in a striker, because it seems to me that they had quite a lot of time to work on it. And obviously I go back to what I said right at the start, that January is a hard window to bring quality players in, and I'm sure Celtic were trying to, but I think there will be a big frustration there, definitely, because of that. They knew that Kyogo was leaving.
Yeah, I think the sense I've got from Celtic fans is that they're asking the question, was there not a plan in place when you let a striker of Kyogo's stature at the club and what he's delivered? Why would you let him go, even if he wanted to, and not have something ready to go behind that? That's the question I think they will be asked. The other thing about Celtic, and I think there was a lot of speculation flying around over the course of the day about Kieran Tierney. I think Brendan Rodgers was spotted getting a flight to London, and a lot of people were putting 2 and 2 together, as tends to happen. But it looks as though, it will happen in the summer. So a wee bit more disappointment there for Celtic fans, you would imagine. Let's switch now. Jane, you were across Rangers. Can you bring us up to date with what's been happening there? Not too much.
Yeah, quite quiet. I mean, you said in your introduction that clubs have signed players for the future, and I think this certainly falls into that category. They've signed midfielder Lyle Cameron from Dundee. It's on a pre-contract though, so he will be Ibrox bound, but not until the summer. So obviously that deal is done, but it doesn't affect what happens in this transfer window. They have, of course, signed Rafael Fernandez earlier in the winter window. They were keen to add more, I'm told. One more that they wanted to bring in, and I'm just told that they just couldn't make anything work that benefited the club. They were at pains to point out when Patrick Stewart did his media briefing, he was at pains to point out that it would be 1 or 2 coming in the transfer window, but only if it benefited the club. They weren't going to go down the road of kind of panic buying, if you like, because they've done that in the past, and they were at pains to point out that they didn't think that was now the way to go on. So they wanted to bring 1 in more, but they couldn't make it work. Going out the way, Zach Lovelace has joined Millwall on a permanent deal for an undisclosed fee, and I'm told that the player wanted to leave. He wanted to return to London, so the club didn't want to stand in his way. They didn't want to have a player on their hands who didn't want to be at the club. He wanted to be closer to London, so he's got his wish, and obviously that's benefited the club as well, because they've got some kind of fee in place for him. But yeah, really interesting, the Lyle Cameron one. It kind of fits into the model that Patrick Stewart was talking about when it comes to transfer policy. He talked about he wanting a core of Scottish players, and also talked about wanting players who can come into the team right now, but they will improve, they will get better, and they could be sold on. And Cameron certainly fits both of those, I would suggest.
Mark, the thing that was going through my head with Rangers on the final day there was, they have that place in the last 16 of the Europa League. So as Jane was referencing, Patrick Stewart did say there'd be one or two. But did you maybe wonder if they might go a bit further given the position they've got themselves into on that front?
No, I'm not surprised. Even though they did bank upwards of £4 million as a bonus for getting to the last 16 of the Europa League, you just have to look at the last set of finances from Rangers, 17.2 million loss. There's a new regime in place with Patrick Stewart coming in as CEO. So much money was spent in the summer. There just wasn't much scope, even with that cash coming in. And I think Philippe Clement was completely aware of the situation. I'm sure he would have liked to have potentially added a winger into his squad on deadline day. As Jane referenced, it didn't quite happen for Rangers. I think Rangers still have a pretty decent set of players to get them through the rest of the season. You're going to see an overhaul in the summer, I'm sure of that. But ultimately, they don't have that much money to play with in this window. And I think that was apparent early on.
We should probably just add, Martin, sorry, from a Rangers point of view, obviously they let some of the players that weren't getting a lot of minutes on the park go. The likes of Alex Lowry is away, Kieran Dowell away as well on loan. And that was something, again, that Patrick Stewart said that they would probably try and move on players who weren't having an impact on the park. I wonder if maybe some Rangers fans might be surprised that Cyril Dessers is still there. Maybe pleasantly surprised, because I think lately he scored some really important goals for the club. But there was quite a lot of talk that he might not stick around. But obviously the window has come and gone, and he's still very much a Rangers player.
Indeed. Next up is Dundee United. I was sort of tracking them today, but very early on I was told nothing would be happening. Nothing really did, other than Miller-Thomson going on loan to Falkirk to the end of the season. Mark, I guess the big thing for them is retaining Sam Dalby.
Yeah, getting Dalby back for the rest of the season, huge bit of business given how important he is to the way they play and the goals that he scores. I also think the signing of Alan Campbell in midfield gives them a bit more strength in that area. Jim Goodwin, I think, is pretty pleased with what they have done as they try and hold on to third place.
Now, Jane, back to you. Brian, I'm not leaving you out deliberately. We'll get to you very, very soon.
Yeah.
Aberdeen, what's been happening in Aberdeen? Because, what a terrible run they're on in the league. They've been active.
Yeah, they have been active, and I don't think that's any surprise at all. If you hear their manager over the last few weeks, he's been talking about having a real desire to add quality to their squad, to strengthen their squad, so that they can try and turn around their recent form, because, as you say, it's been pretty miserable, 14 games now without a win, and they have added to their squad. They've signed the Dutch defender Mats Noester, who was at Ferencváros earlier in his career. More recently, he's been playing his football in Denmark. They've also signed a striker, Odi Bada, from Belgian club Charleroi. He's been capped 40 times by Palestine. He's been described by his new manager as a clinical finisher, which I think is good news. You want your strikers to be clinical finishers, don't you? So that is good news. But it does pose a really interesting question, because there are some reports and rumour that could maybe spell the end of Duke's stay at Aberdeen. I think of time of recording this podcast, there's been no updates on that, no confirmation that Duke is in his way out of the club. We have posed the question to Aberdeen, but they haven't confirmed or denied this at all. But I think that's maybe going to be one to watch.
Yeah, there is, of course, still time for things to happen. Maybe some countries with different windows, all of that. But yeah. Brian, it's your big moment. Let's talk about Hibs. What's been happening?
Well, they signed last week. Not very much today, I have to say. Last week they signed Alassane Mene, a permanent signing from Odense. It's been a fairly quiet window for Hibs in terms of incomings, but going out the door, Jake Doyle-Hayes has had a terrible time with injury. He left the club earlier in the month through mutual consent. A few youngsters have gone out on loan, but in the last hour, Luke Amos and Harry McCurdy have left the club again by mutual consent. I wouldn't be too surprised If Luke Amos heads to Australia, I'm told there's interest there. And Harry McCurdy, there's interest in League Two clubs, a couple of League Two clubs in England. Ellie Ewan, the big news about Ellie Ewan on Saturday, both Stoke City and Blackburn Rovers had intimated an interest. Indeed, there was a bid came in from Stoke City, which I think Hibernian were quite keen to go down the path of, but for whatever reason, there was no agreement finalised with Ellie Ewan, and he will remain at the club until the end of the season. So, yeah, it's been Hibs fans. They'll be happy the way things are going at the moment. They're on a terrific run at the moment, and for David Gray, he was never going to have a lot of money to spend in this window anyway. They had a bloated squad at the start of the season. There's a lot of players out of contract in the summer. Any business that had been happening now, I think, other than the one I mentioned there, a permanent deal coming in from Odense, I think it would have been loan deals, and it really wouldn't have added to the squad. So they're in a good place at the moment, Hibs on the pitch. They're winning games of football, confidence is high, and they're certainly on an upward curve, and they can see they've got their eyes set now in potentially a European place at the end of the season. So as things stand, I think Hibs fans will be quite happy with this window.
You're on a roll, Brian. I'm going to stick with you. Hearts at the other side of Edinburgh, fighting their way up the table. What's been happening, and how do you think the fans will see the window overall?
Yeah, well, again, there was always going to be business done with Hearts and the tie-up with Jamestown's analytics. And although we've already spoken about this not being the perfect window, that's Hearts brought in 5 signings in this window. Today it was Harry Milne from Partick Thistle, a defender, 28 years old. Ideally, though, he's coming in as cover for James Penrice. Penrice has played 32 games, which is already more than he played in the entire season last season for Livingston. So and there's been one or two occasions where I think Neil Crickley would have liked to have rested Penrice. However, he's not been able to do that. By bringing in Harry Milne, they've got cover there now. Stephen Kingley's going to be out long term. Frankie Kent's going to be out long term. So they've also brought in Michael Steinwender from the Swedish club Värnamo. Sander Kartum's come in, a midfielder from Brann. Jimmy McCart, who's been excellent since he came in at the start of the window from Barnsley. But I think one of the signings of the window could be Elton Kabangu on loan from Union Saint-Gilloise. And it's not an option to buy, it's an obligation to buy. So come the end of this season, look out, Hearts fans. Elton Kabangu is going to become a Hearts player on a permanent basis. And again, through the Jamestown's analytics, it looks as if the Tony Bloom influence is already starting to show dividends.
Mark, anything to add to what Brian was saying there briefly? We've still got a lot of clubs to get through, actually.
I totally agree on Elton Kabangu. I think he's possibly the signing of this window in Scottish football. Really good player who could transform Hearts' fortunes this season. A lot of clubs lower down the table, although Hearts are still obviously looking up beyond their shoulder as well up the table, who have done business. I think St Johnstone will be delighted to have added more players today. I think that's them taking their tally to 8 for the window. Sima Valakari bringing in some players that can play his style of football as he tries to get St Johnstone off the bottom of the table. Kilmarnock brought in a new defender, which they needed with Stuart Findlay out for potentially the rest of the season. So Derek McInnes will be happy to have a bit more depth in that department. It's relatively quiet, I think, in places like Ross County and Dundee. Dundee have normally been quite busy on deadline day, but not this time around. A lot of teams have just got themselves set up now to try and either avoid relegation or force themselves into the top 6 in European contention. There's still so much to play for in this campaign.
I love the way you just randomly wrapped up a lot of clubs there. That was perfect for me because we're running out of time here. Jane, let's get back to you. Motherwell, a bit of business again today, which might surprise some given obviously what's going on with the club with Stuart Kettlewell going last week it is now. What have they been doing?
Well, in this winter transfer window, they've actually made a lot of signings. And we saw some of them at the weekend against Celtic, the likes of Will Dickinson, who's come from Man City on loan, Dominic Thompson from Blackpool on a free, Luke Armstrong from Carlisle on loan as well. And they look like they look decent. They look like they're going to bring some value to the club. But today, a surprise, I think, to quite a few Motherwell fans that they added another goalkeeper. That's now 3 goalkeepers have signed in this window alone, and of course they have got injuries. They're beset with injuries in their goalkeeping front, so that's obviously they're trying to cover for that. That the goalkeeper Archie Mayer they signed from Norwich on loan is injured, and he's had to go back down to Norwich to receive treatment. So whether Motherwell fans will see him again in a Motherwell shirt, I'm not too sure. But yeah, Callum Ward has come in on a short-term deal. But yeah, they've been pretty busy in this transfer window, and as you say, a strange one because they're without a manager as well. So I suppose it can ask the questions that who's been doing the signings, who's been looking at these players, who's been putting the requests in to the chief executive Brian Caldwell to bring these players on board. It's a really, really interesting one, and they have put quite a lot of resources into getting all these players in. Obviously, Motherwell 5th in the table, but they're perilously close to that kind of relegation zone as well. So they want these players to hit the ground running. They hope it can make a difference. They hope they'll be coming to the club with real value in their sights. And it's going to be interesting to see how they all gel, because it's almost like the start of a brand new season for these players all coming in. Are they all going to hit the ground running? You hope so, but they've not played together, so it might just take them a few weeks just to get up to speed and to get to know their teammates. And time really is something that Motherwell don't have. They need to get back on winning ways.
Just quickly, they have kept Lennon Miller.
Yeah.
There was a bit of interest in him though, I believe.
Yeah, this is probably, of all the signings that they've made, holding on to Lennon Miller is probably the biggie from a Motherwell point of view. It's my understanding that Celtic made an approach for Lennon Miller. They didn't make a bid, but they made an approach. But I'm told again at the Fir Park Club just said outright that they did not want to sell him right now. They didn't need to sell him right now. So that kind of, put paid to that. And Lennon Miller will stay at Motherwell, which is massive from the Fir Park's club's point of view.
Yeah, well, we'll just quickly wrap up some other things there. As you said, Mark, Kilmarnock brought in Tom Wilson-Brown, centre-half left-sided from Leicester on loan, so we can call him the jester from Leicester going forward. Ross County, nothing happened there on the final day. St Johnstone were very busy. Adam Webb clearly backing the manager there, and of course he's got some decent results to give them a fighting chance. And in the Championship, Scott Arfield has quite astonishingly returned to Falkirk. Also Miller Thompson from Dundee United with Callum Morrison off to Linfield for an undisclosed fee. So they're obviously trying to bolster their options with that title challenge coming to a conclusion in the coming months. That's all we've got time for. Many thanks to Brian, to Jane and to Mark, and thank you for listening. Remember, we're here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every day, so make sure you don't miss out. Subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone. We all did tonight, I'm telling you that. Enjoy the rest of your day, whether you're happy with your club signings or not.
On BBC Sounds. From life aboard a Russian submarine to chairman of Hearts Football Club.
At this stage, he was the hero.
But as his controversial decisions escalated...
They said, we're going to sack George. And I'm going, you can't do this.
How did Vladimir Romanov go from Hearts saviour to a wanted man?
It caused a whole load of chaos and havoc.
Romanov, Tsar of Hearts. Listen now on BBC Sounds.